The Holy Roman Empire, it was never holy, Roman, or an empire. But this historical fiction became the cradle of Europe. Because sometimes to change the world, you need to invent a story millions will believe. The year is 800 AD, Rome, St. Peter's Basilica. The air crackles with anticipation. Pope Leo III places a crown upon the head of Charlemagne, proclaiming him Emperor of the West. In this moment, one of history's greatest illusions is born, the Holy Roman Empire. A divine project or a brilliant hoax? What was it really? A majestic empire blessed by God himself? Or a cunning game of thrones with popes playing theologians and kings playing saints? For 1,000 years, this empire existed somewhere between a dream, a political tool, and a running joke. It had no capital, no fixed borders, not even a common language. Yet millions believed in its sacred mission. Why? Because they were sold a dream. Imagine a state where the emperor is elected like a president, but can't pass a law without the consent of 20 feuding dukes. Where the pope can crown a ruler one day and excommunicate him the next. Where holy meant not moral, but the right to wage war against anyone who disagreed. It was a Frankenstein's monster of a state, the head in Rome, the arms in Germany, and no heart at all. Welcome to the Holy Roman Empire, the most extraordinary political phenomenon that never quite was, yet changed the world. Even as the empire crumbled, its myths lived on. 19th century German romantics wept for the lost paradise of the Holy Roman Empire. But was this paradise ever real, or simply nostalgia for something that never existed? Part 1. The political machine building the Roman Empire. Popes called emperors defenders of the faith, but often their blessings were bought for political favors. For example, Frederick Barbarossa received the crown by promising the Pope troops against heretics. Divine right? More like divine bargaining. This was the idea that monarchs derived their right to rule directly from the will of God, not from the consent of the people or earthly authorities. The divine right imbued the Holy Roman Emperor's temporal power with a sacred legitimacy based on a direct covenant between God and ruler. As God's elected representative, the emperor could demand the obedience and loyalty of subjects as a religious duty. Critics charge that the Holy Roman Empire used the guise of divine right to pursue secular political goals cloaked in religious terms. Defenders portrayed the empire as a vessel for enacting God's will on earth. Under the professed divine right, Holy Roman emperors often exercise unrestrained violence and aggression. Emperors frequently launched wars of territorial expansion and dynastic succession while invoking divine sanction. These bloody conflicts caused tremendous suffering and loss of life. For instance, Emperor Charles V prosecuted nearly constant warfare across Europe during his reign in the 16th century. Unjust trials and gruesome public executions enforced imperial authority against perceived dissenters and rebels within the emperor's domains. Jews and other religious minorities faced persecution and pogroms sponsored or condoned by emperors. The divine right provided ideological justification for such actions as the necessary will of God, enacted through his imperial enforcer. The Holy Roman Empire occupies a unique place in the history of medieval and early modern Europe. Lasting for over 800 years from the 9th century to the early 19th century, the empire evolved into a complex political entity that straddled the line between the secular and the spiritual. The emperor ruled over a patchwork of territories in Central Europe, exerting varying degrees of control and influence. The empire blended the trappings of ancient Roman imperial power with the Catholic Church's spiritual authority. This fusion of religious and political power, known as translatio imperii, endowed the Holy Roman emperors with an elevated, almost divine status. The Holy Roman Empire formally came into being with Otto I's imperial coronation in 962, establishing a continuous line of rulers for centuries. As a Germanic realm, the empire melded the legacy of Charlemagne's earlier Frankish Empire with the heritage of the Roman Caesars. The empire laid claim to sacred imperial authority based on this union of Roman and Christian traditions. The divine aura of the emperor amplified his rule over the patchwork of dukedoms, principalities, and city-states nominally under imperial domain. Imperial governance relied on securing the personal loyalty of subordinate German princes. The Holy Roman Emperor stood as both secular ruler of Central Europe and designated temporal enforcer of the Roman Catholic Church's will. This concentration of power placed God's imprimatur on imperial actions, rendering dissent or rebellion as both treason and heresy punishable by war and excommunication. Critics saw this as mere cynical manipulation of religion to buttress earthly rule and wealth. But for most of its history, divine right staved off sustained challenges to imperial supremacy. Part 2. The Divine Right of Kings. The concept of the divine right of kings was central to the Holy Roman Empire's religious and political authority. Divine right held that monarchs derived their legitimacy and power directly from the will of God, not from earthly laws or institutions. This sacral sanction placed the ruler above all worldly authority, answerable only to God. As his chosen representative on earth, the monarch could demand complete obedience from subjects as a religious obligation. The divine right doctrine first emerged in medieval Europe to cement the power of rulers at a time of fragmented authority. By linking kings to divine approval, it reinforced their supremacy over ambitious nobles and clerics. The divine right reached its peak under the Holy Roman Empire, which claimed ancient Roman imperium sanctified by God. The Holy Roman Emperor stood as God's secular agent, enacting his will in the temporal realm. Imperial coronation ceremonies symbolized the divine covenant between God and emperor. The emperor would swear sacred oaths to protect Christendom and the Church. The Pope or his emissary in turn invested the emperor with imperial regalia, affirming his divine blessing to rule. This ritual sanctification provided the religious basis for imperial governance. Divine right meant the emperor's commands could not be justifiably resisted, since they embodied the very will of God himself. This religious aura allowed the emperor to exert control over the empire's constituent principalities and city-states, which owed loyalty and military service to the emperor as God's anointed representative. Critics charged this encouraged unchecked tyranny, with rulers serving their own interests while invoking divine will. Upon his imperial coronation, the emperor stood above all other worldly authorities, including kings. The French monarchy rejected this supremacy, laying the groundwork for future conflict. Divine right also confronted challenges from the papacy, which wielded its own claims of spiritual authority from God. The investiture controversy of the 11th and 13th centuries stemmed from clashes between emperors and popes over the right to appoint church officials. Overall, the divine mandate lent the multifaceted Holy Roman Empire a cohesion and durability it otherwise lacked. Securing the personal loyalty and submission of the empire's princes proved far more important than efficient administration. The emperor relied on divine right to compel obedience, making resistance treasonous and sacrilegious. This religious aura sustained imperial power amid the decentralizing forces of feudalism and ambitions of popes and nobles alike. The manifestation of divine right in politics and government. This expansive belief in sacral imperial sovereignty had profound implications for how the Holy Roman emperors governed their domains. The divine right provided ideological justification for acts that served to enhance imperial power and wealth, even at the expense of subjects. One key manifestation of divine right was the emperor's frequent use of warfare to settle dynastic disputes and expand imperial territories. Emperors often initiated military conflicts against fellow Christian rulers, citing divine sanction for campaigns of conquest. For instance, Emperor Frederick the Firm Barbarossa sought to impose imperial overlordship on the Italian city-states in the 12th century. His expedition invoked the divine right to subjugate Milan and other defiant cities through brutal sieges and battles. Likewise, conflict with the papacy was justified by invoking the emperor's divine mandate to exert secular authority over Christendom. The divine right also allowed emperors to demand taxation and military levies from subject principalities and territories. Imperial diets or councils convened by the emperor could impose taxes, troop contributions, and other obligations on imperial estates who had little recourse to resist. Those who rebelled against such policies could be branded as defying the divine will and punished accordingly. Within their personal domains, Holy Roman emperors enacted laws and meted out justice based on divine consent rather than popular consent or old customs. Loyalty and obedience to the emperor superseded all other obligations for subjects. Those who questioned imperial policies risked accusations of treason and heresy. This often manifested in persecution of religious minorities within imperial territories. Jews in particular faced periodic waves of persecution and violent oppression under imperial authority. During the First Crusade, Emperor Henry IV refused to protect Jewish communities from massacres by marauding knights, citing divine sanction. In the 13th century, Emperor Frederick II enacted laws restricting Jews' rights and liberties in his Kingdom of Sicily. This demonstrated how divine right could enable prejudice and injustice. Through public rituals and propaganda, Holy Roman emperors propagated their exalted sacral status as God's chosen ruler. Elaborate imperial coronation ceremonies reinforced the divine blessing. Icons, images, architecture, and other symbols all projected imperial might and religious authority. Subjects were compelled to demonstrate obeisance and deference to the emperor's divine aura. This cultivated an imperial cult of personality that enhanced secular power through sacred mystique. In essence, the principle of divine right provided the ideological and religious basis for projects of ambition, expansion, control, and persecution by Holy Roman emperors. It transformed temporal policies into the infallible will of God, compelling obedience from nobles and commoners alike. Critics charge this was merely a cynical facade for earthly self-interest, not genuine divine governance. But for several centuries, divine right allowed Holy Roman emperors to pursue their agendas unchecked under the guise of enacting God's will. Part 3. Critics and challengers to divine right. While the Holy Roman Empire stood for centuries on the pillars of divine sanctification, critics increasingly challenged the legitimacy and nature of imperial divine right over time. Changing philosophies and attitudes opened the way for dissenting views that questioned whether the emperor's power stemmed from God or mere earthly ambition. Early religious dissenters like the mystical monk Meister Eckhart and reformers like John Wycliffe attacked corrupt clergy and practices which they saw as tarnishing sacred authority. Their unorthodox ideas helped lay the foundation for Protestant reformers like Martin Luther to challenge the divine authority claimed by Roman Catholic institutions like the papacy. This ferment eventually extended to scrutiny of secular rulers as well. Humanist scholars of the Renaissance period revived interest in classical philosophy and values. Thinkers like Erasmus emphasized the dignity of man and the use of reason over the Church's traditional dogma. This eroded the unquestioning deference to established authority. Humanists advised monarchs, but many came to indirectly question the rigid dogma of divine right rule. Protestant thinkers went further in assaulting the foundations of divine right ideology. Reformers like John Calvin, Huldrych Zwingli, and John Knox preached that all men were equally sinful, with no special divine sanction for rulers. This was extended by Huguenot writers like Francois Hotman, who argued that kings derived authority from the people, not divine right. These Protestant theories fueled growing anti-absolutist sentiment. Enlightenment philosophers of the 17th and 18th centuries directly attacked the premise of divine right. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau developed theories of popular sovereignty and social contract. They argued that legitimate government required the consent of the governed, not clerical consecration. These rationalist philosophies provided intellectual ammunition against absolutism. Increasingly, rulers sought to cultivate greater loyalty through bureaucracy, propaganda, and cultural appeal rather than singular reliance on divine mystique. But the Holy Roman Emperor's divine aura still helped retard the empire's modernization. The new Enlightenment theories eroded divine claims and fueled revolutionary outbreaks in France, America, and elsewhere that threatened the old order. While these dissenting views built gradually over centuries, they marked the transition from unquestioning belief in divine sanctioned authority to modern notions of popular sovereignty, liberty, and human rights. The Holy Roman Emperor's divine right faced growing skepticism and demands for rule based on reason, law, and consent, not the mute obedience once compelled by divine command. This shifting landscape left an ambiguous legacy, but permanently altered European governance. Part 4. The 30 Years' War destroyed divine right. The 30 Years' War in the early 17th century stands as a watershed moment in the secularization of European governance and decline of divine right claims. This enormously destructive conflict arose primarily as a religious struggle between Catholics and Protestants within the Holy Roman Empire, before expanding into a wider continental war. The underlying tensions stemmed from the Protestant Reformation, which itself had emerged as a challenge to the Catholic Church's divine authority. When Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II sought to impose Catholicism on Protestant territories in the empire, it triggered a Bohemian revolt that spiraled into all-out war. This bitter struggle fused dynastic, territorial, and religious disputes into a disastrous war that engulfed Central Europe. The Habsburg Holy Roman Emperors led Catholic forces against Protestant states like Sweden and Denmark-Norway, as well as reform-minded French allies. Battles, sieges, pillaging, and disease ravaged the populations and economies of Germany and surrounding lands for decades. The 1648 Peace of Westphalia finally settled the conflict on terms that enshrined state sovereignty over religion. The treaties granted full political autonomy and religious freedom to the various princes and city councils within the Holy Roman Empire, checking the emperor's power. This rejected the earlier primacy of religious solidarity under divine right. More broadly, the Westphalian system established the principles of national self-determination and non-interference in other states' domestic affairs. Whereas previously the subjects of international law had been monarchs, they were now sovereign states. This emphasis on pragmatic state interests helped propel secularization and the decline of governance based purely on religious dogma or divine right mystique. The 30 Years' War and its Westphalian resolution marked a major turning point toward modern secular governance, coming just as Enlightenment theories were gaining traction. The unspeakable devastation caused by sectarian religious conflict further spurred the impetus to shift toward practical state administration and religious tolerance. This gradual process steadily eroded the supreme authority once claimed by divine right rulers like the Holy Roman Emperor. Part 5. Secularization and Decline of Divine Right. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the supremacy of divine right faced escalating challenges as Enlightenment values and theories of governance spread across Europe. While belief in the sacral nature of kingship remained strong in some quarters, divine right underwent a marked decline as rationalism, political pragmatism, and skepticism gained ground. This erosion of divine claims contributed to the eventual collapse of the Holy Roman Empire itself. Thinkers of the Enlightenment era, like as Descartes, Locke, Voltaire, and Hume, attacked the premise of divine right rule through scientific inquiry and rational philosophy. They argued for legitimacy based on social contract and popular consent. While few explicitly rejected religion itself, they opposed blind deference to dogma and sacred authority. Enlightenment theories found particular reception in Prussia, the rising German Protestant power. Its enlightened absolutism grafted rationalist ideals onto kingship, dying away overt mystical trappings of divine rule, even as it upheld absolutism. Prussian reforms inspired by figures like Voltaire helped erode divine myths. The French Revolution dealt the greatest blow to divine right ideology in continental Europe. Revolutionaries explicitly rejected the divine right of kings and decried sycophantic deference to aristocratic privilege as unreasoning superstition. They enthroned the cult of reason and a supreme being to replace divine kingship, further undermining traditional mythology. Napoleon exploited this secular, nationalist zeal across Europe, dissolving the Holy Roman Empire in 1806 after defeating Austria. He established a French-style legal code and efficient bureaucracy in its place. This marked the decisive replacement of medieval divine right polities by modern secular nation-states. The Holy Roman Emperor's religious aura still briefly persisted in Austria until 1848, when revolution ended divine claims. Ethnic nationalism and popular constitutionalism displaced loyalty to dynastic divine right across the continent. Religion remained important in public life, but without the blind deference once accorded to monarchs by divine command. Part 6. The Empire as a Man-Made Political Construct. While the Holy Roman Empire relied heavily on divine mystique and sacred authority, critics increasingly argued it was more a construction of human politics and interests than genuine divine ordainment. As divine right ideology declined, Some historians and philosophers portrayed the empire as originating from pragmatic political needs rather than holy mandate. According to this view, the empire represented a fictional construct that mixed history and religion to provide medieval rulers with ideological legitimacy. The Holy Roman Emperor's sacred aura masked an institution shaped by earthly requirements of managing territories and rivalries. The empire claimed continuity with ancient Rome and Charlemagne's earlier Carolingian realm, but this lineage was largely mythological. Otto the Rancun deliberately revived the imperial title in 962 for its political resonance after centuries of dormancy. This allowed him to assert authority over the Pope, Italy, and feudal magnates by evoking historical memories of Roman Imperium. Successive emperors cultivated Roman rituals, like the triumph and imperial cult, to shroud themselves in sacred authority. But critics charge this deliberately manipulated history and religion to serve political goals, not God's will. The Holy Roman Empire was less divinely ordained than a handy political fiction. Likewise, critics argued the emperor's religious pretensions masked secular objectives. Imperial policies aimed more at wealth, power, and dynastic prestige than advancing true faith. Pragmatism, not piety, governed actions. For example, Emperor Frederick II battled popes over Italy while conducting diplomacy with Muslim powers. Secular motivations also appeared to drive serial conflicts with the French monarchy over territory, population, and resources that had little to do with religion per se. The same held true for internal imperial disputes over rights and privileges between emperor, princes, clergy, and towns. According to skeptics, the empire opportunistically evoked divine right when useful for political disputes, but readily abandoned religious principles for secular advantage. At heart, the emperor was just another temporal ruler, using religion as a key source of propaganda and legitimacy, not a holy vessel. Over time, this view of the empire as more grounded in earthly politics than divine sanction gained increasing currency. Emperors relied ever more on bureaucracy, economic development, and realpolitik over mystical authority. Napoleon's dissolution in 1806 proved the emperor was dispensable once divine myths faded. In retrospect, the empire came to be seen more as purposeful mystification than sacred governance. Part 7. Holy Roman Empire's Legacy and Meaning. The Holy Roman Empire left an ambiguous legacy that has been interpreted in various ways, reflecting disagreements over whether it represented divine ordainment or man-made artifice. Its meaning remains disputed between those who see it as a vessel of God's will on earth and those who view it as purposeful mystification serving earthly interests. To supporters, the empire fulfilled its sacred mission of defending Christendom from chaos, infidels, and heresy for centuries. The divine right of emperors prevented the factionalism and conflict that plagued other realms, maintaining stability. The empire was thus a holy bulwark against a fallen world. Even in its final centuries, defenders argued divine rule brought relative peace and legal order to Central Europe in an era of turmoil. They credit providential design, not human engineering, with enabling this success. The empire's longevity and historic role as the center of Christendom bore out its sacred purpose. Skeptics counter that the empire was embroiled in as many wars and intrigues as any secular state. Its mystical aura masked as much cynical realpolitik as divinely inspiration. The empire ultimately collapsed not from loss of faith, but military defeat and realist calculus. To critics, the empire's legacy was not holy governance, but purposeful myths that lent legitimacy to mundane power politics. Its divine rituals and authority were mere theater disguising temporal objectives and struggles. Providence had little to do with its contingent evolution. Both views carry validity. At its height, belief in imperial divine right was devout and widespread across Europe. But over time, the Holy Roman Emperor relied ever more on earthly tools to reinforce increasingly hollow claims of sacredness. The empire proved not eternal, but a transitional phase between medieval and modern. Its paradoxical blending of sacred ritual and realpolitik left an uncertain meaning that still sparks debate. The Holy Roman Empire played an undeniable role in European history and Christendom's evolution. But whether that reflected divine predestination or man-made myth remains open to interpretation. Conclusion. At its height, the Holy Roman Emperor commanded obedience as God's designated deputy on earth, his decisions sanctified by divine right. This sacred imperial authority enabled the empire to thrive as a center of order and Christianity for centuries, defying unstable medieval conditions that plagued other realms. Yet the empire was also beset by earthly conflicts and motivations like any secular state. Critics increasingly charged its divine trappings masked cynical efforts to accrue power, wealth, and prestige. Dissenting philosophies eroded religious myths over time. The Holy Roman Empire represented a singular political entity in European history, one that intertwined sacred ritual and divine claims with realpolitik in an ambiguous blend. Its evolution over centuries touched on profound questions about the basis of authority, governance, and the relationship between spiritual and temporal power. The Holy Roman Empire ultimately proved unable to perpetually reconcile its dualistic nature. The divine mystique central to its existence faded in the face of rationalist skeptical modernity. The emperor's aura could not save the empire from dissolution by Napoleon. This ambiguous legacy has sparked enduring debate over whether the empire represented divine providence or man-made artifice. Its paradoxical character left an uncertain meaning. The Holy Roman Empire's long history and rich symbolism ensured its legacy would remain subject to multiple interpretations, each gleaning different lessons from its centuries of sacred governance intermingled with profane politics. The empire's blended sacred and secular aspects reflected the continual contest between divinity and temporal authority running through much of European history. Its ultimately unresolved tensions and contradictions continue to fuel disagreement over whether it served as vessel of God's will or purposeful myth. The Holy Roman Empire's uncertain meaning endures as a window into ideas of power, faith, and governance.